Hello, and welcome to the course. I'm your host, Stephen, and today I'm speaking with Professor Haresh Sapra of the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Professor Sapra is the Charles T. Horngren Professor of Accounting at the Booth School of Business, as well as the editor of the Journal of Accounting Research. He has won teaching awards in all the programs at Booth and been named one of the top-ranked professors in Business Week's Guide to the Top Business Schools. He's here today to talk to us about his early life on the island of Mauritius, how he came to learn and love what he calls the language of business, and of course, how he became a University of Chicago professor. Professor Sapra, welcome to the course. Good morning. It's lovely to have you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Could you please just tell us your position at UChicago and how might you explain that to a layperson?
Yes, so I'm a professor of accounting at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. My research is about understanding what I call the real effects of accounting measurement, which means how measurement changes behavior of firms in terms of how they, again, take decisions, and these decisions matter for the economy because they affect valuations of firms and, at the end of the day, shareholder welfare. I also teach accounting, obviously. The teaching part of it deals with making students understand that there's a language out there, what I call the language of business, and that's what accounting is. So once you understand that language, you understand it's a very interesting, rich language. At the same time, this language can be manipulated, and that's why we see earnings management or even fraud.
I love the phrase you used about it being a language, and I look forward to getting into that a little bit more. But we're going to go much further back into your personal history for a minute. When you were a kid, what did you imagine you might do with your career? Did you always see yourself researching accounting?
Oh, absolutely not. So I grew up on an island. I grew up on the island of Mauritius, which, as you may know, is a tiny dot in the Indian Ocean. I had no idea I was going to even leave the island. I had no clue there was such, growing up, I was so naive. I grew up basically in a family of four other siblings, I would say lower middle class. For me, it was just getting out of high school and that's it, being on the island and being on the beach, drinking coconut juice and chilling. And I wanted to be, I don't know, a fisherman or, a barber. As you can see, it's kind of ironic. I would like to be a barber. I don't have any hair right now. But I was fascinated by very simple things in life. And because that's all I knew, right? Being on the island.
For the record, I mean, I think that you could still be a barber. It's not about your own hair, right?
That's a very good point. That's right. That's right. I could do that. Yeah, maybe. I still have plenty of time. So maybe that would be my next gig after being a professor of accounting.
Looking forward to that next chapter. Can you tell me just about the journey kind of in between then and now? I mean, you said it was just about getting out of high school. Like, what led you to pursue college and yeah, how did that all unfold?
Yeah, so quite interesting. I finished high school and we didn't have enough money for me to even travel overseas. I did very well in high school though. However, I didn't have, I knew I didn't have a chance to go overseas given that my parents were struggling growing up. So my goal was very simple at that time, to get a job after high school. I worked in a sugar factory. So Mauritius, at that time, definitely the main industry was sugarcane. So I got a job at a sugarcane factory. I was an assistant chemist. I loved physics and chemistry and science. In high school, I did very well. I had fantastic teachers. So it was natural for me to do science. And I got this job that was paying me very well at that time. I would say I was like 18. They were paying me 5,000 rupees a month, which at that time was like $300 a month, which was amazing for a high school student. So the job was great. I love what I was doing. Essentially, they were bringing sugar samples from the factory, and I was testing the acidity, pH, the viscosity, the density, and reporting that daily. And then I had meetings with, the essentially the factory people, giving them guidance about various things. So I was enjoying life. I was doing what I love to do. So at some point I went to my mom after working for a year and a half, and I told her, you know what, Mom, this is it for me. I'm going to continue working at the sugar factory, and Life is good because they told me they'll give me a car even. I'm like, wow, I'm going to
Wow.
be a self-made man. And my mom like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? You need to get out of here. Go and make something out of yourself. So to give you some context, my brother was studying in Canada at that time.
Mhm.
And so my mom told me, your brother is studying. Imagine someday down the road, you'll be here stuck on the island and the guy would be, doing very well. So I think you need to at least follow in the footsteps of your brother. So she's the one actually who essentially pushed me out of the island and said, go study, go get a college degree. And then I applied for college in the US. I had no clue, to be honest. I applied randomly to 5 or 6 schools, universities here. And the first university that reached out to me was University of Houston in Houston, Texas, obviously. And then again, I had no idea where Houston was. So naive. And they gave me a scholarship based on my high school, grades. So I went to Houston. I basically flew from Mauritius to Houston, and I was almost 22 at that time. So I started college where most people were finishing college. I started college in the US at the age of 22, unprepared, no idea about how humid it was, how big it was. And again, my English was very poor at that time because, I grew up, speaking French and taking classes in French in high school because it used to be, I went to a French high school. So I had to learn English later in life. There's a school of hotel and restaurant management at U of H, University of Houston. And I walked in there, I say, I would like to work as a waiter. They're like, we don't have a job as a waiter. There's a job as a busboy.
Mm.
Would you do that? And I was like, I had no idea what a busboy is. Is this a boy driving a bus? I'm like, what is this? Like, no, 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 no. Come on, follow me. So he showed me, here's a dirty table, clean it. You have to remove all the dishes, take everything on a tray, and which was not easy.
Mm.
I'm like, okay, how much would you pay me? He's like, oh, I'll give you $4 an hour. It's like, wow, that's amazing. And you get food, you get
Mm.
free lunch. So I started working at that hotel while I was working on my college degree. And, talking about how I got into accounting was completely by fluke also. I love science. And I thought that to get a job, I should do something that, at that time was in demand, which is computer science. So I was studying computer science and I had to take one business elective in the business school. And so I decided to take accounting. And it seemed very natural to me. It was like made a lot of sense. A bunch of rules and there was a structure to it. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So I took accounting. I did extremely well. I think I topped the class and the professor came to me. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, computer science. Like, no, no, no. You won't get paid with that in the US. Accounting, you can get a job with Big Six at that time, the Big Six accounting firms. You should think about that. So I switched. I switched my major to accounting. And yeah, I did very well. I essentially got my college degree. At the time I was almost 20, 27, 26, 27, very late. So see, yeah, this is how accounting started for me. I was like, I became a CPA now. I did very well in the CPA exam. And I applied for a job as an auditor, but I didn't last very long. I essentially was fired probably, well, I was told to let go. I wasn't fired. I was told you should probably leave the job. You're not going to be good at this because I was questioning everything. I was essentially, doing over there, right? Auditing is an interesting job because you're supposed to go there and verify the accounts of your clients. But for me, it was like, no, you should just go there and not tell your clients what you're going to check, surprise them. Uh, because auditing is all about shock and surprise. Because if you tell them what you're going to check, they'll be ready for you and they'll always pass, right? So for me, it was like, no, you should go in there and do some audit procedures that they don't expect. But, of course, I was just a very junior guy on the team and they're like, who are you? So I got in trouble a few times. Finally, it's like, I don't think you should be doing this. You should look for a different job. And so then I was completely disillusioned. I'm like, I did all this to become a CPA, and my goal was to work for an accounting firm. What do I do now? And this is where I got the advice of, went back to one of my professors of economics, actually, University of Houston. He told me, you know what? You probably should think about getting a PhD in accounting. I'm like, why would I do that? I know everything about accounting. He's like, no, 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 no. There's a whole world out there of accounting research. So you should really think about getting a PhD in accounting. Told me there are two places you would like to go to. One of them is University of Chicago. The other one is University of Minnesota. So I applied to those two schools. And I got rejected from the University of Chicago because they told me, hey, your GMAT score is not very high. It's not even our MBA students have higher GMAT scores than that. So I went to the University of Minnesota, and that's where I got my PhD, which turned out to be amazing because I had an amazing mentor over there who essentially, really taught me many things. One of them was how to do research, how to approach research, and how to think about interesting questions to work on that matter for policy. And the irony, of course, is I wanted to come to the University of Chicago, become a professor, and that's the same place that had rejected me. And I did. I joined University of Chicago as an assistant professor in the year 2000. And here we are 24 years later. So,
Oh, wow. Yeah. So U Chicago, they figured it out eventually
they did.
before too long. You mentioned, having an important mentor and really learning how to ask interesting questions when you were in graduate school. What were some of the early things like about that experience that, hooked you, I guess, and convinced you that this was actually how you wanted to spend your career?
My advisor essentially would meet with me on Saturdays. And then first he would tell me to go and read some research papers that, dealt with accounting issues, regulatory issues or disclosure issues. And I would go on the board and present these papers to him. And basically then we would step back, and the way he would approach this problem is he would say, well, what is the question? Why does it matter for companies out there? And what are regulators saying? So let's look at what are the trade-offs whenever you look at a problem. Whenever you look at a problem, you should look at it from a very, fundamental perspective, which is think about why does this issue matter to firms, to regulators, to shareholders, to investors out there? And also start any research with a deep question, right? Because there's always a tendency for researchers to say, oh, you know what, I have the data, or, there's a debate out there. Let me try to sit down and write a model about it. That's fine. But I think the way he essentially taught me to approach research was always take a public policy debate out there and look at what they're debating and see, first of all, that makes sense. Then try to sit down essentially and write a model about that. So I'm an accounting theorist, which means that I'm trained as an economist, an applied economist, and I don't use data in my research. I use economic models. So I use equations, a lot of equations in my model. And in these models, what I do is I look at different agents. Like a regulator might have an objective of making sure that the regulation has its intended, purpose, while this regulation might affect firms in a certain way. So firms' objective might be different from that of regulators, and then you might have investors out there. So I bring all these parties into an economic model, and each one of them is doing the best that they can or optimizing given the information. And then I study what happens when you have this regulation, right? How does that change their behavior? And do firms make better decisions as a result of this regulation or not? That's the approach, essentially. Work on important questions, fundamental questions, but always start with the questions, right? Then go and find the model that would answer that question, versus saying that here's a model, let's try to fit it in this question. And because of that, the work is challenging but interesting, right? So every paper of mine, in a way, I'm not taking the same models I've worked in other papers. I have to sit down and think about what model do I have to build in a way to be able to address this. And many times I fall flat on my face. I can't find it, but that's okay. It's a journey. Then you keep trying until eventually you're like, wait a minute, here it is. That was one of the things I learned from my mentor. The other one is to be a good advisor, right? You have to spend time with. He was very unselfish. He would meet with me on Saturdays and spend time with me throughout my PhD career. He was very unselfish, wanted to help, because he felt that in a way, felt like if he does that to me, I would do that now with my PhD
Yeah.
students. And I feel that way also now, that, you know what, our job as professors is not just to teach and do our own research, but it's really to help, the younger generation, approach research and, help them so that they go out and help others. And it's like a paid forward, so to speak. Then the job is very rewarding because you can see your PhD students doing very well, or even my MBA students. If you give them the right mentorship, help them, you can see that it makes a huge difference in their lives. It's not transactional anymore. You have an amazing relationship with them, and they also stay connected with you. That's what makes the job fun at the end of the day. It's like helping others, learning from them, and also feeling that you never know it. You're learning all the time.
Well, yeah, actually, our typical final question is, what do you find the most fulfilling about what you do? But I don't know, maybe you just answered that question.
Yeah, I think it's this ability, especially this is probably also being at the University of Chicago, what makes the place, in my mind, special. It's a place that allows you to, essentially be a student, right? That's one way to think about it all your life, right? Be a student, experiment, learn, better yourself, right? In a way, the whole place is structured in a way that you are as good as your last paper. So keep pushing, keep working. And that's what, for me, that's what keeps me going, keeps me, because it's never boring. Yeah, you always meet someone from whom you learn something new. And there's always something. I'd say almost like I feel, even though I've been doing this for 24 years, it's still the tip of the iceberg when it comes to learning and writing cooler papers, more important papers. It's still the tip of the iceberg. There's so much that I don't know.
So you would sign up for another 24 years of this, it sounds like.
Remember, I have the barber, right, stint that you talked about. So it's a trade-off between continuing this and becoming a barber. Don't
Maybe you can take a
know.
gap year.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah. So far, yes. So far, I think I want to keep going.
Well, what questions are you interested in and excited about right now, like from a research perspective at the moment?
So, a couple of things I'm working on right now, and one of them is on climate risks. Climate change is huge in my mind. It's one of the biggest, I think, gravest issues that we face, as humanity faces. And what can accountants do about that, you may ask? This is science, and well, I think it's huge. Given back to what I had mentioned to you earlier, accounting is all about measurement, and we need to measure climate risk in order to be able to control it, to
Right.
discipline firms. And here, that's my research. Current research is about firms in general all over the world. The regulators are mandating firms to disclose their carbon emissions in their financial statements. And these numbers would be audited and disclosed just like, you're disclosing information about performance, cash flows, or earnings. So my research right now is about what are the economic trade-offs or cost and benefits of mandating firms to do that. In particular, what are the cost and benefits in a world in which there's disparity in climate regulation, right? Some jurisdictions, such as the European Union, are far ahead of the US in terms of mandating these emissions. In other words, they are asking firms to disclose not only their own direct emissions, but also those of their suppliers, which could be, in a foreign country. Could be, you could be located in France, but your supplier is in Vietnam. So the French firm not only has to disclose their own emissions, but also and measure it and report it, but they also have to measure and report emissions of their suppliers in Vietnam due to them in France, right? Because your supplier is producing an input for you. So that's the essentially where the EU has gone. Very comprehensive disclosure. In the United States, interestingly, we're behind. There's been a lot of lobbying and pushback on this, where regulators finally caved in and said, okay, we're only going to ask firms to disclose their direct emissions, the US firms, not those of your supplier. And the a large percentage of the emissions comes from their suppliers, which means that's not going to get, reported and disclosed, which I think
Right.
is not the right way to go. So yeah, so my research comes in and say, what are the consequences of doing that?
Mm.
Right. And you can imagine the consequences would be that you would outsource, you know, to your suppliers to basically pollute, and you look good here in the US. So are we really approaching this problem from the right way? So I don't think so, right? So that's one problem I am working on currently. The other one is essentially looking at banks. So I'm very interested in banking because bank and accounting go hand in hand. Because what banks do is we monitor banks through by setting capital requirements. You need to have enough capital, meaning equity, on your balance sheet, not too much debt. And that equity is measured using accounting rules, again, measurement rules. But surprisingly, the banking regulators have essentially not given accounting too much attention. In other words, some assets are not marked to market on the balance sheet of the bank, so that when the market values of the securities drop, they're not recognized because of accounting rules. But banking regulators know that they should be using these losses to calculate regulatory capital. But somehow they are not doing that. So the question is, what are the consequences of bank regulators ignoring these mark-to-market losses? And Silicon Valley Bank is an example of that. Very quickly, interest rates went up. The market value of their securities dropped, but because of accounting rules, they did not write them down. They were sitting on unrealized losses. Had these regulators acted on these unrealized losses, they would have intervened sooner, you could argue. They didn't. Why is that? Right? Is it because the accounting rules did not allow banks to recognize these losses on their profit loss statement, perhaps? So that's an area, again, I feel is super important because it has, consequences for the economy.
That's very relevant. I mean, it's very interesting to hear like the direct impact, direct relevance that your work has. We usually ask people if they've traveled for research and like what kind of world travel they might have done in graduate school or afterwards. But am I correct in saying that you recently returned from Hong Kong? You were over
That's
there for the
right.
winter quarter, right?
That's right. Yeah, that was amazing. So I went to Hong Kong in early January this year, and I spent my winter quarter in Hong Kong as a faculty in residence on the Hong Kong campus. It was an amazing experience for me because not only did I get to interact with the stakeholders of the school there, the alums, the business community, but of course the staff in Hong Kong. I teach in the executive MBA program in Asia and in London. So I was also doing my teaching over there in Hong Kong. I hadn't been to Hong Kong since 2019 because of COVID crisis. So going back there again after 4 years, almost 4.5 years, and interacting with the stakeholders of the school was very useful. So I learned a lot, and we have an amazing and beautiful campus in Hong Kong, which is, in my mind, underutilized as a university. So my goal is coming back from doing this residency in Hong Kong. My goal is to make sure that we, as a university, find ways to better use that facility. Not just the business school, but more importantly, the University of Chicago, because it's a lovely facility, and I think essentially we could be doing other things over there.
We'll get the word out, starting with the show. We're nearly out of time, but I just wanted to wrap up with one last question, which is, what advice would you give to someone who was, considering following in your footsteps?
That's a great question. I mean, given my journey, I would say just keep an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
Being on the island of Mauritius, I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing. And so keep an open mind, try different things. I think we human beings We very early on in life, I think, especially nowadays when I talk to parents, they already know, or very young people know what they want to do. And that, to me, we're not experimenting enough. I think it's very important to experiment because I think we are meant to do whatever we want to do in life. I mean, look at me, right? I had no idea I'd be doing what I'm doing today, being a professor at the University of Chicago. That's like, sounds crazy to me. But the reason I'm here is because I allowed myself to try things. I listened to the right people also. So be a good listener, talk to people. Don't, early on in life when you're in high school or whatever, be set in your ways. I want to be a doctor. I want to be an engineer. I want to be an entrepreneur. Be willing to change. I think change is very, very good, right? I don't feel I just fell into this, right? So experiment and learn from that. And you can't fail if you experiment. Worst case is you try something new.
Even if you really like the sugar factory, you can see yourself there for the rest of your life. You got to get out there, experiment.
Exactly.
Thank you, Professor Haresh Sapra, for your time today. And course takers, if you enjoyed today's interview, please check out the other ones. Leave us a comment, subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your friends and family. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. Stay tuned for more, and thanks for listening.